Yo, what's good, y'all? Today I'm gonna be doing something a little bit different than usual, and that's gonna be talking about the current state of the Forge. It's in a major decline right now with like no sign of recovering at all. But the good news is this game still has a ton of potential, in my opinion. Now, I don't know if y'all have noticed, but recently there's been a good handful of games that have made like a pretty decent comeback. Jujutsu Infinite and GPO, for example. Due to recent updates, these games have had a huge spike in their respective player counts, and I believe, potentially, the Forge could follow that same path. Now again, I don't know if y'all have heard, but they recently just announced a World 4 update, and this could potentially be that fix. Realistically, do I think it's gonna be? Absolutely not. But we're gonna talk about exactly what they could do in order to cause this spike. Now, the main things I'm going to be talking about moving forward are as follows: guilds, player builds, skills, forging changes, dungeon raids, cave breaks, a world hub, and finally, exploration. Each of these main sections are going to have their own subsets where they'll also introduce different types of topics and things like that, little features, but you'll have to see when you get to them. All of this, in the end, will all tie together to hopefully completely fix this game and turn it into a complete RPG instead of a macro simulator. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is builds. And before I really get into this, I want to preface that this is arguably the most important thing I'll talk about throughout this video. Now, I say this because every other topic I'm going to talk about in this video is going to, in some way, build upon this topic. It is also very important because it takes advantage of all the unused content that's already in the game. This game currently has a problem with variety. Despite all of the content in the game, all the different weapons and armors, there's really no reason to use anything else other than heavy armor and a straight sword. Builds specifically would fix this issue, but how do they add them? Now it turns out that the answer to this is actually a lot simpler than you might think. Simply make it so certain armors buff certain weapon types. An example of this is literally already in the game, that being the Berserk armor set and the Colossal Sword. Simply make it so the Berserk armor set buffs the Colossal Sword. And you could do this for just about every weapon type. There's already another example of this already in the game, that being the Samurai armor set. Simply make it so that set buffs katanas. With this addition, not only will old gears that may seem pointless now have some type of use, but all weapon types can now become viable. This would also be such an easy change for the devs to add, as all you really need to do is make a simple stat tweak and all of a sudden everything works. Now this alone clearly isn't enough, as heavy armors are still way better overall, and even if we fix this issue, it wouldn't be fair as light armors are way cheaper, and same thing with certain weapon types. So how do we fix both of these issues while also catering to builds? I suggest you make it so heavy armors slightly slow down your attack speed, but specifically make it so the debuff is only a minor subtraction rather than a multiplication difference. This way, heavy armors will only cater towards the heavier and slower weapons, while lighter armors will cater towards the lighter and faster weapons. Now this works because a heavy weapon's DPS isn't as reliant on its attack speed compared to a lighter weapon's. For example, say heavy armors provide a 0.1 debuff when it comes to attack speed. This will have less of an effect on heavy weapons as their DPS is reliant on their damage output per hit rather than their attack speed, when it's the opposite when it comes to lighter weapons. To put it simply, a constant debuff of say minus 0.1 to attack speed will have a much greater effect on lighter weapons that rely on their attack speed compared to heavy weapons that don't really rely on their attack speed. This way, by design, heavier armors will naturally cater towards heavier weapons and vice versa, further building into the whole build's theme. Now obviously, with how this game's crafting system works, it wouldn't necessarily be fair to simply make it so heavies and light armors are equivalents in some ways. However, I have a solution to this. Simply make it so a light armor equivalent to a heavy armor is much rarer compared to its heavy armor counterpart. For example, say there's a really good light armor variant that's supposed to be equivalent to a certain heavy armor variant. Simply make it so this light armor variant is 1 out of 32, while the heavy armor is 1 out of 8 when it comes to crafting for it. This specific 4x multiplier works because when it comes to crafting a light chestplate, it requires 10 ores in order to craft it, while a heavy chestplate requires around 40. This way, it will theoretically require the same amount of ores to obtain either armor piece. This specific change would open a ton of doors, allowing for light and medium armors to now become viable, and the same concept could also be applied to weapons. Now, all of a sudden, the crafting system is fair, and every possible armor piece or piece of gear is allowed to become viable without breaking the game. With all of these changes combined, millions of doors open, allowing for so many possibilities when it comes to build creation that it's actually crazy, man. People can now make tank builds, damage dealer type builds, samurai builds, whatever they want. And because of how the game's storage system works, it would allow people to store entire builds in the inventory and aim for a new one and grind for a new one. Blah, blah, blah. It would also play into upcoming features like guilds and raids, as potentially raids would require you to build a strategic party in order to beat it. But hey man, I'm just saying. Anyways, I could talk about this section forever, but I think it's about time we move on to the next one. Shut the fuck up! The next topic I want to talk about is skills. This game's combat is honestly kind of dry in my opinion. Honestly, it's pretty much just like an M1 simulator with like an occasional parry, so something needs to change. I think skills specifically are exactly what the game needs to fill this variety and also add something else to aim for, which I'll get into soon. As for how you actually add skills, I think the way to do it is make skills very simple. For one, this would fit the game's design in a way, as combat is simple, and I think it would make sense for attacks to be simple. For example, like a simple dash and strike attack, maybe a jump slam, or maybe a simple barrage attack. Skills don't need to be super flashy and have crazy VFX like a lot of these games nowadays. I think most of these games are going way too far, and it will be beneficial for this game specifically to just keep things simple. You could even add more passive type skills. For example, a skill that buffs yourself or your allies, or something along those lines. And this specifically would play into a build that I didn't mention earlier, but I wanted to, that being the support type build. With this build, obviously the main focus would be to support your allies, whether it's through buffs or whatever, or even just support them pretty much. So if they get in a tough spot, get them out of it, whether it's through your own efforts, like physically with a weapon or whatever, just through your buffs too. But I think an interesting concept would be to add things like ranged weapons, aka bows. You could forge bows, crossbows, things like that, and this specifically would cater towards the support type class. These more passive type skills I think could be really interesting, as they could even play into things like the tank type build. For example, you could have a skill where you attract the attention of all surrounding enemies, just like in a typical RPG. Pretty much making it so, say your allies are getting pummeled or whatever, like your damage dealer, and you need to get the enemies off them. The tank does that, and he takes the majority of the damage. This way, it's clear that skills will not only build upon the build system, but add more strategy to the game's combat, and more things to think about, and also more things to do, and also just be more interesting in general. Like, I feel like these two concepts build upon each other so well if done correctly. Right now, honestly, bosses feel bland because honestly, I don't really feel incentivized in order to fight the boss. The only real thing you can gain for it is its heart. But like, dude, that's such a boring drop in my eyes. Like, I feel like if you could get skills, that would make things interesting. You could potentially make it so some base type skills or some more common skills are obtainable via a shop or whatever type basic method, but the super rare and good ones should be obtained through things like bosses. Now, I also think, because skills should theoretically be made simple in this game, I also think skills should be very abundant. In other words, there are a ton of skills in the games and a ton of possibilities for variety and building upon your build. For example, a damage dealer is going to want a barrage type skill, while a tank player is probably going to want that attraction type skill. You could also potentially lock these skills behind different weapon types to keep a certain skill catered towards a certain class. So maybe only tanks can get the attraction skill, and maybe only support type weapons can get the ally buff type skills. Now, as for how specifically skills should be applied, I think it's obvious. Make it so weapons have a certain number of slots that skills can be put into. So maybe you have it so a base level straight sword only has 3 slots, while a higher, more rare grade of the straight sword has maybe 5 slots. You could even get more creative with skills by maybe making it so a certain race is eligible to obtain a certain skill, or maybe a skill is built into a certain race. Maybe angels have the ability to heal themselves. Maybe demons have the ability to steal life from others. I think if you do this though, try to at least give each race its own skill and don't just leave it for the insanely OP races, as it's kind of ridiculous. Like, you should try to give some type of skill to golems and things like that to make things interesting. Now, I think you potentially make it so a skill is specifically only for one weapon type. For example, maybe you can only use a specific barrage on daggers, and you can only use a lunging attack on, say, spears. I mean, you could potentially crossbreed them if you could find a way to make it work, but I also don't hate this idea of skills being specific to only one weapon type, as it adds purpose to each weapon type, making it so, say, if you want a specific skill for your build, you're forced to go for that weapon type. Now, with skills being added, it's obvious that the difficulty of enemies are going to really need to increase. Honestly, the difficulty of enemies thus far has been kind of whack, I'm not gonna lie. They've been really easy. Especially bosses, dude. I could solo bosses almost straight away. It's ridiculous. I honestly think you shouldn't really ever be able to solo a boss, especially if that's the world you're in. It can be excusable if, say, you're in World 7, of course, maybe you can solo the World 2 boss, World 3 boss, but it should require a whole party to be able to solo these things. But the good news is, I don't think they need to necessarily revamp the enemies they've already made, as it would make sense for the early worlds to be somewhat easier compared to the later to come worlds. So, I think from now on, if you just make it so enemies are harder, specifically AI wise and how they fight, I think this would be a lot better. Also, as a side note, it's kind of ridiculous how almost every enemy starts off with the same attack pattern. Like, there's no variety or randomness or change to it. Like, it's always whenever you approach them, they use the same attack every time. That's stupid and it's so predictable. Please at least like randomize it to add some type of unpredictability. Now, I think that's pretty much gonna wrap it up for skills. I think I covered everything. So yeah, let's move on to the next topic.
You are such a beautiful little gay boy.
Now, for the next topic I want to talk about, it is guilds. This section specifically could be huge, like actually massive, but it just as much depends on the community as it does the devs to implement it. Now, they've already talked about adding guilds into the game, which is great, but I want to talk about specifically the two potential ways they could implement them into the game. The first being the obvious choice that pretty much every game ends up going with, which is just allowing people to create their own guilds and going from there. But this never really works out as intended. Just look at GPO, for example. Sure, it's a bad example, but this happens in every case where guilds almost become something that's put off to the side and really just ends up being like a title card over your head with no real like features to it. Now, the second choice is the one I want to focus on because I think it has a ton of potential. This being making it so there are four main guilds already pre-built into the game that players can join. So, in other words, you can't create your own guild. Now, I know off rip, all of y'all are going to hate that idea, but bear with me and just hear me out, right? Because there would now be only four guilds in the game, not only would these four guilds be much larger, but there would also be much more interaction between these guilds because there's only four. This could potentially lead to interactions like propaganda and things like that. If you've watched that one Minecraft video where it's like two islands versus each other, I think it could potentially go in that direction if it's done right and the community actually gets deep into it. Because these guilds would be pretty much built by the developers, you could also make it so each guild has their own ranking system, and you could also have the devs make Discord servers for each guild. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Because the guilds would be created by the devs, pretty much controlled by the game, you could have it so there's a ranking system built into these Discord servers and in-game guilds. So, you can make it so in these servers, there's events like maybe a dungeon raid or PvP trainings or things like that. And on top of this, you can make it so maybe in order to reach a certain rank, not only do you need a certain strength requirement, but maybe you need to participate in a certain amount of dungeon raids in order to reach that rank. And you can have it so you have to constantly climb the ranks and progress through this guild. That way, guilds are actually interactive and there's something to do within them, and it's not just a title card. You could also make it so maybe only a certain rank can host these dungeon raid things or trainings or whatever. So people actually have a reason to chase that rank because they want to be able to host a dungeon raid with people in the guild. But the main purpose is that these Discord servers are really the main thing that adds this type of interactiveness. So maybe we have it so there's a certain channel where you host these dungeons and things like that. Maybe only a certain rank has access to post links and whatever in these channels. Blah blah blah. You go from there. You could also get even more creative with this and do things like guild wars, or maybe there's in-game lore and beef between each guild, and maybe every so often there's an event where during this event there would be this own private world, like not world 1, 2, or 3, like its own private world just for this. And it could be an in-game limited event where members from each guild can join and fight each other, and it's like a 50v50 type thing. It could be actually insane. You could even have squads, like maybe a certain rank has their own team or whatever of people in the guild. Like it could be crazy. If you want to do this event type thing where it's like a war, you could make it pretty simple where there's a certain time frame where this war is going on, and you can join this world only if you're in one of the two guilds. You join it, and if you're in one guild, you get spawned on one side. If you're on the other guild, the other side. And basically, you just go in the middle and fight each other pretty much. And you can make it so each kill is tallied towards the total points of whatever, and by the time the time period ends, whichever team has the most points wins the war. Blah blah blah. Or you could actually make it specific where each player can only join once, and if they die, they're out. And so whichever team is left standing, I guess, technically wins. Of course, this would have to be across multiple servers, so it'd be hard to do, but get creative with it. Now, as for joining a guild, obviously just make it so you have to reach a certain world in order to be eligible to join guilds. Maybe you make it so, I'm going to talk more about this later, but you can join the guilds in the world hub, which is a section I'll talk about later. Or maybe you make it so it's just a part of the story. So maybe once you reach world 4 or 5, an NPC approaches you and asks you what guild you want to do or whatever. But genuinely, this whole guilds thing could be so fun if it's done right, and also done with all the other things I'm talking about. Like PvP would be fun. Like, dude, if they do this right, like I'm telling you, like this could be so much fun. Now, the next topic I want to talk about is the first specific change I'm going to talk about instead of a mechanic they should add, and that being a change to forging specifically. The main issue I have right now currently with the whole forging thing is that the super rare ores you get, no matter in what island it is, they become practically pointless once you reach the next world. Matter of fact, the common floor loot in the next world will be better than the super rare giga rare ores you got in the last one. This pretty much completely demotivates you from hoping to get these super rare ores, as why would you? Why would you spend so much time grinding for them if they're just going to get replaced next update? It's completely pointless. Now, obviously, with how the world system works, it has to go this way. So how do you fix this without breaking the world system? Simply make it so when you're forging, there's an optional slot that you can put an ore into, and when you put an ore in this slot, the ore's multiplier doesn't affect the weapon's multiplier and only passes on its trait. With this feature, every super rare ore that's been in the game, no matter what world it's a part of, will have some type of purpose going forward, as maybe that specific trait is what you need for your build specifically to optimize it. This would also just add more reason to go and explore old content, no matter what world you're a part of. Because say if you want a certain trait on your sword that's not a part of the world you're in, but it is in the old one, then you have to go back to that world, explore, get that ore, and blah blah blah. It reuses old content that's already in the game, and it's exactly what you should do in this game. This would also just only increase build potential like tenfold, as now there's so many possibilities when it comes to what attributes you could apply towards certain weapons. You could go crazy with it. There would just be another huge layer laid on top of builds, and would make it so interesting. For the next topic, we're going to talk about two concepts that pretty much coexist. Those being dungeon raids and cave breaks. Dungeons are a topic in pretty much every RPG like ever, and I don't think anyone would complain about having dungeons in this game, as I feel like it would almost complete it. But as for how dungeons specifically should work, I think they should be something that you find in caves. Specifically, I think if they make dungeons in the form of portals, almost like in solo leveling, where if you find these portals, you can enter them and start the dungeon. This would add to the exploration factor that I'm going to talk about later, but pretty much it adds to that exploration theme where if you explore the caves, maybe you have a chance of finding this portal which you can raid and potentially get really good loot from. Now, obviously, dungeons in this game should act like almost every other dungeon in any game where you have to go through this path, whether it's a cave or whatever, fight hordes of enemies, and then eventually beat the boss. And if you beat the boss, you get the reward. One thing I want to emphasize though is that I believe dungeons, if added into this game, should be very end game material specifically for each world. So, for example, you cannot beat a dungeon if you don't have end game loot for that world and you don't have an entire party. In other words, they shouldn't be easy. And in consequence, they should also give you really good loot. Here's where it gets interesting. I think you make it so if someone doesn't clear the dungeon in a certain amount of time, the enemies will come out of the dungeon and raid the world, just like in solo leveling. This is the whole cave break concept I was talking about earlier, where if the dungeon isn't completed, the enemies will come out. And how this specifically could work is almost like a tower defense type game, where the enemies obviously start at the cave point and they work their way down to the village and are trying to kill the villagers. But you try to kill them obviously before they get there. And if you defend it, you potentially get some type of reward. I think personally, what you should do is you just make it almost similar to how Minecraft pillager raids work, where if you beat the raid, everything will be cheaper. But in this case, make it so everything you buy will be cheaper, obviously, but also make it so armors will sell for more, so you'll make more money. This way, this specific system has a specific gain to it that's unique compared to everything else. Now, I also think to make this a little bit more immersive, maybe you make it so all the time you have villagers walking around. Even if it's just like 3 little NPCs, it doesn't need to be a lot, but just make it so throughout the day NPCs are walking around, and when these eventual raids happen, they start scrambling around, running like crazy, and then obviously the enemies can kill them. Also, with all of these possible ways to gain loot now, like dungeons, stuff like that, bosses, whatever, there should also be some type of chest system where it's almost organized. It's almost like an organized way of getting this loot, and it also makes it more satisfying. So, just for, I don't know, satisfaction's sake, I think there should be some type of chest system where if you beat a dungeon or something, you get a chest, and that drops a reward. Yada yada yada. But anyways, back to the whole dungeons and raids thing. I think these two mechanics would be so interesting, and it would add so many layers to the game. And it would also add purpose for guilds, for one. For example, say there's a super high level dungeon that spawned in a world, and you don't want the raid to happen. Maybe make it so you have to call in a guild, and then the high level players will come and come clear it. Also, like literally on the spot as I'm thinking of this, maybe make it so if a raid does happen and you lose, so a dungeon break happens and then you lose the raid that they come down, maybe you won't be able to sell your gear, or maybe you won't be able to forge, like some type of inconvenience to make it so you want players to beat these dungeons. I think it could be very interesting if you get creative with it. The next topic I want to talk about, which I think I mentioned briefly, is the idea of a world hub. Now, I think that this specifically would be interesting as it would like add like a chill little area that any player could go to no matter what world you're in. I think this area specifically could be interesting because you could do a lot with it. Maybe you have unique shops that you wouldn't normally have in the typical worlds, and maybe you even get extra creative with it and allow PvP in certain areas of this world hub. Maybe you have us to even have trading here. I want to talk more about that specifically because I know that's like an edgy topic. Maybe in these specific unique shops, you can buy certain weapons or skill scrolls, and maybe in the forge in this specific island, you can forge whichever weapon possible that you have unlocked, I guess. You could also include guild related things here, like maybe there's a base for each guild in each section, or maybe recruiting is done here, who knows. Now back to trading briefly, as I know that's like a touchy subject. I think obviously it could go very bad if they add trading, but if they do decide to do it, make it so for one, you can only trade weapons, not ores. Two, certain weapons that are made by certain ores are locked behind world requirements. So if you're not in a certain world, you can't obtain that gear yet. Maybe you even make it so you can only trade things like skill scrolls or blueprints, runes, or whatever. Even if that's the only thing, like I think that's
kind of bread is this?
I don't know.
Okay, but I feel like it would be a good idea to trade things like gear and weapons, just obviously lock it behind like world requirements so it doesn't be completely game breaking. Yeah. Main point of this isn't trading. Honestly, trading doesn't really matter. It could be okay, but whatever they decide to do. But the main point of the World Hub is to be like a whole community area, community building, things like that. I think it could be pretty interesting. Now, the final thing I want to talk about is another change instead of a mechanic, and that's going to be about exploration changes. Exploration is something I feel like they're not really taking advantage of, and honestly, it's been pretty bland so far. Specifically in World 3, the cave layouts are very, very boopy boopy. Specifically, the peak and the spider cave, they're literally just circles, and also the ravenous cave, it's literally just a straight line. It is so boring to explore these, and it feels more like a grind zone or like a place where I'm supposed to be employed rather than something to explore. I feel like in Worlds 1 and 2, they kind of did a better job as the caves were layered and there were things to find in the cave, like, for example, the volcanic area. And when you went down to the cave, not the volcanic area, when you went to the left and then down that cave, you could find that little enemy section, like things like that. Like you could go down and there were things to explore. That sadly kind of went out the window in World 3. However, I do got to give them props for this last update they added where this new cave, like the maze rearranges every day. That's a great idea. I love that. However, it gets ruined by the fact that the whole point of that cave is for a pickaxe. Please, please stop adding these cool details just for a pickaxe. Nobody cares, buddy. I was at least expecting a boss in this section. I got so disappointed when I found out it was literally just for the opportunity to buy a boof pickaxe. I don't care, buddy. So, to summarize, the first point I made is fix the layout of how these caves are built. They should be layered, structured, and it should feel like there's a lot to find and explore. They shouldn't be circles. That is no bueno. Now, the other thing is there should be things to find in these caves. Like, again, they did a pretty decent job in caves World 1 and 2, but I think they should try to be even better than that. A way they could do this is maybe making it so you can find random loot spawns if you get lucky enough in one of these caves. Make them big enough so things can spawn and it's like, whoa, I found something. You could also make it so there's new types of rocks. Like maybe there's a super rare rock that doesn't normally spawn and it's almost guaranteed to get a good ore. Almost like the floating rock, but make more of these. But obviously, what I'm trying to say is if you're going to add more to explore, you also need to add more to find. So maybe there's hidden chests you can find that'll give you good loot or scrolls or whatever it may be. I also think the idea of different cave zones, like the whole volcanic area, such a good idea. But they should do more of that. Maybe each cave has multiple zones, more than just like one other one. So maybe you have the volcanic area, and then you also have like another different area that's in one cave. So there's like multiple different zones to each cave, make it very interesting. I would totally not be mad if instead of having like 5 caves per world, make it one cave and then it spreads out as you go deeper into different sections where you need better pickaxes. So, like in all these areas, instead of having 5 caves for different sections, have one cave with multiple sections in it. That would also make complete sense. And again, with the whole thing with pickaxes, like I'm thinking about the Mosasaurus specifically. These details are very cool, and I respect that they're doing them. But the fact that all of it is always for a pickaxe ruins it in my mind. As ugh, it just like icks me out. Like, do it for something that's like useful. Maybe if you find this certain secret area, you can find a skill scroll or a blueprint or something like that that you obtain, or maybe it's a chest that you have the opportunity to get something good from it. But like when I'm exploring, I don't want the opportunity to buy something that's like $3 million. When I'm exploring, I want to find loot and just get it. You could even make it so you find a pickaxe for free. Like that would be good with me too. Like, but I don't know. It aches me out how the current pickaxe system is working. Like again, they do a decent job with like certain mysterious things, but when there's nothing there to find and it's just like bland, they almost feel pointless. So just add more to find, I guess. Like maybe you keep adding different types of puzzles, mazes, and things like that in order to get to a certain area, blah blah blah. Get creative with it. Like did pretty good with Word 1 and 2. I'm repeating myself. This last session is gonna be a little unorganized, but whatever, man. It's my last one. But anyways, I think you guys get the picture of what I'm trying to say. Yeah. All right, I'm probably gonna end it here. I want to give a shout out to the devs. I love what they've done thus far. I'm just being very critical because I know they can do a lot better. I'm not trying to take a duke on y'all, I promise. I'm just being critical. Anyways, I appreciate y'all for watching. If you have any ideas of your own or ideas that build off mine, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear it. The whole point of this video is to help fix the game, and I'm sure thousands of mines are better than one alone. So let me know. Again, I appreciate y'all for watching. Make sure y'all join the Discord. I'll catch y'all. Peace.